Hey everyone, welcome back to another Clip Studio Paint tutorial. And in this tutorial, I'm going to be going over the filter tool. Filter tool has various tools that put special effects on your drawing. So for this example, I have a really quick sketch that I did of two characters, and I want to put a blur effect on the character in the background to make him look more like he's in the background, just to give the drawing a little bit more depth. So usually what I do before I put a blur effect on my drawing is I separate anything that I want a blur effect on. And for this, I go over to the lasso tool, and I select what I want blurred. In this case, the character back here in the background. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make two copies by on my Mac, Command C and then Command V. And I'm going to do that again, Command C, Command V. And now I have two copies. So for one of the copies, I'm going to call it blur. I'm just going to put call it layer 1 blur. And this will be the one that'll be the layer, the raster layer that will have the blur effect. So I'm going to go back to my layer 1, and I'm going to erase this character here because I don't need him on this layer anymore. And so I have layer 1 copy, which is just that one single character. So now I have both characters separated. And I recommend you do this when you add a blur effect to any of your raster layers. So we have the guy in the foreground, and then one of the original characters that is in the background, and then a copy of it so we can put a blur effect on it. So we come here to filter, blur, and the very first option is called blur. This is a pre-selected blur value. It's just a generic value. So if it works for you, you can go ahead and use that. I'm just going to hit the undo and then go back to the original unblurred. And then what I'm going to do is select the filter tool again, the drop down. And there's this other option, blur strong. Blur strong is pretty much the same thing, only a little bit more strong with the blur effect. So now you can see already that the character in the background looks more like he's in the background. It gives it more depth. Now, if you want to control the amount of blur, say you want to add another character behind him that's even further away, I would recommend the Gaussian blur. Gaussian blur allows you to set a certain value, and if you have this little check mark here set, it'll allow you to preview how strong your blur effect is. You can either type in a manual number here, or you can mess with the slider and slide the value. So you can see the higher the number, the blurrier it gets. In the same way with the slider, you can slide it. Now if this becomes too hard on your computer, just remove the preview, and you're gonna have to hit OK and then undo if it's not what you wanted, and then back and forth. But usually the default value of 6 is good enough for me usually. So, and that is the blur and Gaussian blur tools, and I use it for purposes like this. Now I will say that if you blur a raster layer and then draw on the raster layer and you hit blur again on it, it's not going to match the blur, because you're pretty much putting double blur on, you're putting a blur on a blur, so it's not going to work for you. This is why I recommended keeping an original copy. So what I would do if you wanted to, let's say I want to add a tree next to this guy or something, what I would do is let me let me just draw, like, say, yeah, you see you want to draw a tree or something. I would not draw it on this layer because it already has a blur. What I would do is I would go back to the original, and then draw whatever you wanted to add to it, and then make a copy, and then blur the copy. But always keep a original unblurred copy, just in case so you can go back and add stuff, because you can't add a blur to a specific thing unless you're using the selection tool. Another blur tool is this one, where it's a motion blur. So here I drew a man running, and I also drew some lines here so you can see the angles. So you can see here that when you add the blur, and I'll check the preview here, and you can see that at a 0 angle, the blur is horizontally, right? And so if you change it to 90-degree angle, your blur becomes vertically. And of course you can add a 45-degree, and it will go in a 45-degree. And in that manner, in that diagonal 45. And so you can play around with the angles if you have a different angle. And so motion blur, what I like to use it for is like for something like this, if you're drawing a man running, or you're drawing the Flash, or if you're drawing somebody throwing a punch and you want to show his fist in motion, this is the tool that I would use to show motion. Now there's also this box and smooth. So the box, it looks like it gives you this where it's having multiple drawings, where a smooth is more like a fuzzy look. So let's look at the man running in a box, and you can see it almost like there's multiple copies of the drawing spread across, and then a smooth is more of where the line of your artwork is made fuzzy. And then you have the front and back option. And so because I want the man to look like he's running forward, I choose the front blur, and that means that the blur is trailing behind him. If you put it in the back, it'll go in reverse. So it'll start from the back and move the blur forward. But since my character is running to the left, I'll put front, and so now it's from the left and it's blurring to the back. And so you can mess with these settings. Like I said, the smooth will kind of blur the line, where a box will be more of a copy of your drawings trailing behind. And so you can also mess with the slider here to change the intensity of the blur. And so just a couple effects to make your drawing look more like it's moving. And also you can use a selection tool if you want only a specific thing to be blurred. You can certainly do that, but it doesn't look too good, because like almost half his body is blurred and then the other half isn't. So I mean, that could work for some things, maybe like if it's just his hand that's moving fast. Another tool we have is the I believe it's called the radiation blur, right there, radiation blur, and that's more of a circle kind of blur. So you can move this little red X anywhere, and this is where the blur is going to radiate from. And again, you have these same settings like front, back, or front and back. So if you look at the little circles that I drew in the upper right here, you can see that the blur is happening from the circle, and it goes outward with a front blur selected. And then if you switch it to back, you'll see that the blur goes from the circle in towards the red X. So, and this is something you can probably use for like somebody screaming, and you want to show like shock waves going outward out of his mouth, or it's like Star Trek, where the starship is zooming into warp speed. You can have something going into a certain point, or you can even, like, if Flash is running into a tunnel, into like he's time traveling, you can certainly use this effect also. So you can be pretty creative with it. Another tool, this smoothing. I'm not sure what it does because I click it and nothing seems to happen. So I don't know if I'm using the tool correctly or not. So I'm not too familiar with smoothing. So this other tool here in the filter, correct drawing line. With this tool, let's say I want to thicken up the lines of his hair. So I'll select with the lasso tool his hair, or it can be any line, and you can correct the line width. You can either make it thicker or thinner. In this case, it's thick. So, and then I just mess around with the slider, and I can make those lines thicker. This is in case like when you draw something with the pen, but you wanted it thicker, but you don't want to redraw it. You can always use this tool here to just thicken your lines up or thin them out, depending on your needs. The remove dust, I'm not sure what that does, so I'm gonna skip over that. This one seems to just add noise, so I'm just gonna select an area here, and then if you select this noise here, just puts kind of like a fuzzy noise. Yeah, I've never really used this tool, but it's there if you need to put some noise. The only thing I can think of is like static on a TV, maybe. I don't know. Mosaic seems to, it's under effect, mosaic, seems to pixelate your drawing. So here you'll see I'll kind of pixelate it. You know what, he kind of looks like the old Doom games from back in the day when you pixelate it. But yeah, I'm sure this will make, if you're into pixel art, this should make your art really, really simple, because you can go ahead and draw it normally and then use this effect to pixelate your drawing so it'll look pixelated. So this is, if you're into pixel art, that tool should come in handy. Sharp, just, it seems to remove the anti-aliasing off of your lines. So here I'll select sharp real quick, and you'll see the lines seem to become sharper, almost like it's removing the anti-aliasing. And then of course there's sharp strong, so it really looks sharp. So if you're not familiar with anti-aliasing, if you come over here to the pen tool, see these options here, anti-aliasing. If you click the very first option here, you'll see how the lines look very pixelated. That's because anti-aliasing puts us kind of like this third option here is as default medium. The anti-aliasing puts kind of like a fuzzy effect on the edges of your lines, and it just makes it look smoother. That's all it does. So you can certainly remove the anti-aliasing, but you'll see the very edge of the pixels. So I think that's that filter tool, Sharp, and sharp strong. I think that's what it's doing. It's pretty much taking the anti-aliasing off your lines. So this next filter, transform, there's several options in this one. So I made this grid here with the numbers on the side here, 1 2 3 4 5, and then 6 7 8 9 10. If you hit this polar coordinates one, what it's doing, it's pretty much taking the 1 through 5 side and matching it with the 6 through 7 side. So 1 will meet with 6 and 5 will meet with 10. Kind of like this. It's curving this side this way and this side this way, and so the center will be right there. So this will be the center. And so if I hit that filter again, polar coordinates, you'll see that the center's right there where I said it was going to be. And then 1 meets with 1, 7 with 2, 8 with 3, and so on. So this next transformation tool, it's kind of I think it's made so you can put like a roundness to your face. Like, so if you have a drawing of a face and you want to, and it kind of looks flat, and you want to add some kind of roundness to it, you can use this tool. You can play with the slider here to mess with the intensity of the curve, and then there's this drop down menu down here at the bottom where it says well, right now it says apply to the whole thing, and then this one right here. So now you can mess with the roundness of the area you want to affect. And of course, moving the red X moves the area around. And so let me try. I did have a face of Mr. Doom here. Let me see how that works here. So I'm gonna move the red X kind of towards his nose here, and then so I'm just gonna mess with these settings here. Try to match his face. See how now it's kind of curves on the edges, so his face is a little bit more round, whereas before it was very flat. So a tool like this can help make your character's face look a little bit more round. Yeah, that seems about right. Something like that. Whereas it was flat before. So another transformation is the Fisheye Lens. This is something like so like unlike the face one where it was just a certain area of the drawing, this pretty much takes the whole drawing. So the very corner of your drawing, it kind of rounds it off on the edges. Kind of makes it look like a old school TV. And then of course the slider, you can mess with the intensity of the curvature and stuff. So the next tool is wave, or no, the pinch. So that pretty much kind of like if you were pinching your drawing. So you can see by the grid how it kind of goes into the X. And then wave just pretty much puts a wave on your drawing there. Again, you can mess with the sliders to add different effects or intensities to certain things like the wave or the amplitude, stuff like that. And then we have the wave shapes. This is a sine wave, and it just does really weird things to to your drawings. There's a triangle and then there's a square. I've never really used these effects. I wouldn't even know really what to use it for. You could certainly experiment. Whirlpool would seem something like you would use for like it pretty much does a swirl on your drawing. So if you ever wanted to do a swirl on your drawing, like in water maybe, and so here on the intensity, the positive number, the swirl kind of goes to your right or clockwise, and then if your numbers are negative, it goes counterclockwise. So you can mess with those there. And then in zigzag, it just puts zigzags on your lines there. So yeah, a lot of interesting tools in the filter to help enhance your drawings. But like I said, I mostly just use the blur tool. That's the one I use the most. It helps me just to put depth into my drawings. So yeah, that's the filter tool. I hope you guys found this informative. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And yeah, I will catch you guys in the next one.